The laughter stopped the moment she said it. 1 second, 30-year-old Rowan Mercer stood alone beneath the bright daytime lights of the company's luxury rooftop celebration, holding a glass of sparkling water and trying to pretend he did not hear the jokes being made about his faded shirt and worn-out shoes. The next second, the most powerful woman in the entire company had crossed the crowded room, placed her hand gently on his arm, and calmly announced that he was with her. What nobody in that room knew was that Rowan had spent the last 6 years sacrificing everything he had for one person, his little daughter. And what the billionaire CEO knew about him was about to change the way everyone looked at him forever. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that a person's worth is never measured by their clothes, money, or social status, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that message, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. Your support helps stories like this reach people who need a little hope. Rowan had never imagined himself standing inside a place like this. The company's annual celebration was being held on the upper terrace of a magnificent glass building, surrounded by elegant decorations, expensive suits, designer dresses, and people whose names appeared in business magazines. During the day, the city below looked bright and alive, with sunlight reflecting from countless windows and traffic moving through the streets like silver ribbons. Rowan, however, felt like he had accidentally walked into someone else's world. His navy shirt was clean but several years old, his shoes had been repaired twice, and the simple watch on his wrist had belonged to his father. He worked as a maintenance supervisor for the company, a position that rarely earned attention but required him to arrive early, stay late, and quietly solve problems nobody else wanted to deal with. Rowan had been invited because the company wanted every employee represented at the celebration. He almost refused. His daughter, Maisie, had been asking him for weeks whether he would attend, and he finally promised her that he would go for at least a little while. Before leaving home that morning, he had packed her lunch, braided her hair as best as he could, checked her school bag, and left a small note beside her breakfast reminding her that he loved her more than anything in the world. His life was not glamorous. It was early mornings, grocery lists, school fees, laundry, overtime, and quiet nights when he calculated whether the money in his account would last until payday. But Rowan never complained. Every sacrifice felt small compared with seeing his daughter smile. Inside the celebration, however, some employees noticed him immediately. A few young executives glanced at his clothes and exchanged amused looks. One of them, Calder Voss, had spent years believing that people deserved respect only if they possessed money, influence, or an impressive title. Calder knew Rowan worked in maintenance, and he had never bothered hiding his contempt. He made a few comments loud enough for others to hear, joking that Rowan must have mistaken the company party for a job interview. Another employee laughed and asked whether Rowan had come to repair the lights instead of attending the celebration. Rowan smiled politely, pretending the words did not hurt, because he had learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant refusing to give cruel people the satisfaction of seeing your pain. Then Calder went too far. He noticed Rowan standing alone and began making jokes about him being a single father who probably could not afford anything at the party. Several people laughed. Rowan lowered his eyes and tightened his grip around his glass. He thought about leaving, but he remembered Maisie's excitement when he had told her he was finally going somewhere special. He wanted to return home with his head held high. He did not want his daughter to grow up believing that people like them should feel ashamed simply because they had less. Across the terrace, however, someone had been watching everything. Her name was Serafina Vale, the company's billionaire founder and chief executive officer. She was known throughout the business world for being brilliant, disciplined, and almost impossible to impress. Employees usually became nervous whenever she entered a room because she had a reputation for noticing details other executives ignored. That afternoon, she had been speaking with investors when her attention shifted toward the small crowd surrounding Rowan. She watched the laughter. She saw Rowan's expression. More importantly, she noticed that while everyone else had been enjoying themselves, Rowan had quietly stepped away earlier to help an elderly catering worker who had nearly dropped a tray. He had done it without asking for recognition, without checking whether anyone was watching. Serafina knew something about Rowan that almost nobody else did. Months earlier, during a difficult morning at the company headquarters, a major electrical failure had threatened to shut down an important presentation. While senior managers argued over whose department was responsible, Rowan had worked for hours to restore the system. He had missed his daughter's school event that day because he stayed behind until the building was safe and operational. He had never asked for overtime recognition. He had simply done his job. Serafina had remembered him ever since. Now she walked directly toward him. The conversation around Rowan faded as people noticed the CEO approaching. Calder's smile disappeared. Rowan looked confused, almost alarmed, as Serafina stopped beside him. Then, in front of everyone, she placed her hand gently on his arm and said that he was with her. The words were simple, but they landed like thunder. Nobody laughed. Calder suddenly looked uncomfortable. The same people who had mocked Rowan moments earlier began staring at their shoes. Rowan could barely process what was happening. Serafina did not introduce him as a maintenance worker or a struggling single father. She introduced him as someone whose character she respected. She explained that Rowan had repeatedly protected the company, helped employees without being asked, and taken responsibility when others were busy looking for someone to blame. Then she revealed something even more surprising. She had recently reviewed several employee welfare reports and discovered that Rowan had quietly donated part of his limited overtime earnings to an emergency fund for co-workers facing difficult circumstances. He had never told anyone. He had never asked for praise. When Serafina asked why he had done it, his answer had been simple, because he knew what it felt like when one unexpected bill could change an entire month. The room became silent. For Rowan, the moment was overwhelming because he had spent years believing that kindness was something you gave without expecting anything in return. He never imagined that one day someone powerful would notice the small things he had done when nobody was watching. But Serafina was not finished. She announced that the company would create a new employee support initiative designed to help working parents with childcare, emergency expenses, and education costs. She said the program would be named after a principle Rowan had demonstrated throughout his years with the company: dignity before status. She also offered Rowan a promotion into an operations leadership position, not because she felt sorry for him, but because she believed his ability to lead through responsibility and compassion was exactly what the company needed. Rowan stood there fighting back tears. For years, he had worried that being a single father made him less valuable in the eyes of employers. He had missed opportunities because of school emergencies, worked exhausting shifts, and carried responsibilities that nobody saw. He had wondered whether his daughter would someday understand how hard he had fought to give her a better life. That evening, he finally understood something. Being tired did not mean he was weak. Having less money did not mean he had less worth. And being a single father was not a mark of failure. It was proof that every day, despite fear and exhaustion, he had chosen to keep going. When Rowan returned home later that afternoon, Maisie ran toward him and hugged his waist. She noticed the tears in his eyes and asked what had happened. Rowan knelt beside her, held her tightly, and told her that sometimes the world takes a long time to notice good people, but that does not mean their goodness goes unseen forever. Months later, Rowan's life looked different. His new position gave him more stability, but the greatest change was not financial. It was the confidence in his daughter's eyes when she saw her father walk into her school events. He no longer had to choose between working extra hours and being present for every important moment. The company's new family support program helped hundreds of employees, and Rowan became one of its strongest advocates. As for Calder, he eventually apologized. Rowan accepted the apology, not because the insults had been forgotten, but because he had learned that holding on to bitterness only allowed the past to keep controlling the future. Serafina remained Rowan's mentor and eventually became a close friend of the family. She never treated him like a charity case. She treated him like a man whose resilience had reminded her why success should mean more than accumulating wealth. And every year, during the company celebration, Rowan would look around that same rooftop and remember the afternoon when people had laughed because they thought he was nobody important. Then he would remember the moment the Billionaire CEO walked toward him and changed the entire room with 5 simple words: he was with her. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. Sometimes a simple act of support can help a story of kindness reach someone who is quietly struggling. And before you leave, please comment one word: kindness, if you believe we should never judge someone by what they wear, what they earn, or where they come from. Because sometimes the person standing quietly in the corner, feeling invisible, is carrying a battle nobody else can see. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stand beside them and say, "He's with me," to remind the world that every human being deserves dignity, respect, and a second chance.